Thanks for joining us, Hayes. As you can see already from the video, that you've been sort of an entrepreneur focusing on a lot of these business. Maybe let's start by talking about going back a bit, right? So you started your entrepreneurial career outside of sustainability, but very quickly you pivoted to sustainability. What caused that? What led you to sustainability?
Well, I think the short answer is the problem that I was trying to solve early out of school wasn't big enough. Mm-hmm. And I realized that I couldn't attract the talent that I wanted to work with unless I was focused on a bigger problem. Mm-hmm. And that became climate. So, 10 years in the Silicon Valley, working at Oracle, selling software, I'm like running to the Golden Gate Bridge one day thinking, what am I doing? Like, why have I been peddling software, enterprise software? I mean, it's an important thing to do, and it paid well. But ultimately, I decided I wanted to build an impact business focused on really solving significant problems for humanity around sustainability and water. And so I knew I needed that in order to stay inspired and to inspire other extraordinary executives to join the mission.
Great. And when we think of business of sustainability at Georgetown and at McDonough, we're really focused on the role of businesses, which you've sort of already touched on, as well as Paul did. And especially thinking about how to equip them, as the video said, like the decade of how to tackle these problems, how to innovate around these problems, and especially across all kinds of organizations, right? Whether it's startups, whether it's for-profit businesses, nonprofits, NGOs, and so forth, right? So you probably have a very unique perspective on this, because even if we just think of GoodLeap, it's at this intersection of homeowners, contractors, policy, and so forth, right? So how do you think about the role of businesses in solving these problems?
Great question. Look, I've been obsessed about the how. Like, that was the piece that I figured, hey, the scientists are going to do their job. They'll drive awareness. They'll educate. But I'm the kind of person that I like to roll my sleeves up and make it happen and operate and build things. And so I've never gotten it right, and I'm sure I don't have it right now. Okay, but I'm always thinking about, is there a better way? Believe in a better way to build that business. And so my solar business was acquired by Tesla and Elon, mm-hmm. and I went, to go kind of unite those businesses together as Solar City and Tesla Energy for another decade of my career. And we were totally vertically integrated, and we grew that business from just a few of us to 20,000 employees to 17,000 residential solar systems a month. But again, totally vertically integrated, building one of the largest manufacturing facilities for batteries and solar panels, very, very expensive CapEx, mm-hmm. Big fleets of trucks. And when I mean vertically integrated, I mean from the moment we would do the marketing to the moment the system was installed. All those were W-2 employees. That wasn't necessarily the best idea. It was expensive. And so as I thought about my next journey, I thought, okay, I'd read a book called The Blue Ocean Strategy. And I said, okay, if you could find a way to make your competitors your biggest partners, you can scale exponentially. And so I started to think about a marketplace of, what if I was technology agnostic? What if I let any engineer build the best battery or the best solar panel or best HVAC system? What if I could partner with all the banks and financial institutions versus we did all of our financing in-house through a structured financing solution in a lease or a purchase power agreement? And then I thought, okay, then I could offer any product in the marketplace where everyone won. And this is really the key, Vishal. The insight was, I was like, if I could find a way for the banks to win, insurance companies, sovereigns, wealth funds, credit unions, if they could all participate in financing clean energy, and get the returns that they're used to on other products and solutions like mortgages or auto loans. If I could find a way for contractors to have access to the best products and solutions with very simple point of sale, either in the home or in retail, where they could show that consumer the monthly payment that was going to be lower than their existing monthly payment for electricity. And then ultimately, I was like, the homeowner wins. They lower their carbon footprint. As you saw, around 40% of all carbon emissions come from decisions made in and around the home. So that's the problem. Okay, how do we make it easy for homeowners to adopt these solutions, electrify these solutions, and at the same time save money? And that was the insight that I had when I created the marketplace of GoodLeap, which was, Well, it's a lot like Airbnb. It's a lot like Uber. It's a lot like other marketplace businesses. If I can just connect those financial institutions that want to finance these assets at scale with the contractors that want to deploy and grow their businesses and run profitable companies with a mission, and then ultimately the homeowner wins.
Yeah. I'll build on a couple of things that you said just so that to highlight them even more. One, that once the technology is there, and we have a lot of technology out there, right? The bigger challenges are how to scale them and how to get them adopted. And sort of what you hit on, which I keep seeing in many different contexts, not just in energy and other things, that solving that requires solving the business problems so that every stakeholder is better off, right? It's creating those win-win opportunities so that everybody gets on board and has that incentive to adopt them, right? So it's interesting to see how that came together for GoodLeap as an idea to scale and exploit that.
Well, I'll elaborate. Like if you go to a bank, if you sit down with Jamie Dimon and say, look, Jamie, I want you to finance solar energy. Jamie says, well, I don't know anything about it, and how long are these systems going to last, Hayes, and this sounds crazy, and are people really going to adopt these technologies? And then you go across the street to David Solomon at Goldman Sachs and have the same conversation. They're like skeptical. If you say, well, what if you could buy $100 million a month of these assets? And what if I could deliver, double-digit returns for these assets? Hyper-diversified assets across the United States, really strong, FICO scores. You're betting on the U.S. homeowner, and the default rates are less than 1%. Oh, wait a minute. This sounds better than auto loans, right? And so it took me 15 years of discussions with that. But the good news is, insurance companies have a very low cost of capital. They start coming to the table. They want to participate in the space. And really, when we talk about scale, it's a big problem. It's a $50 trillion problem globally. It's a $10 trillion problem here in the United States. If you really look at the numbers on the energy transition, you can't leave the financial institutions behind. Right. They have to participate, and the way you inspire them is with very traditional, boring returns that they're used to, with predictable assets that they can trust, where they go, wow, these people make their payments. Yeah, go figure. No one wants to pay more for electricity. And people are interested in taking control of their own power. And so it's taken us, I'm really happy at scale, we do humbly around 30,000 transactions a month, throughout the United States, and we're growing very quickly. But it's because of that scale, that flywheel effect that starts to happen, where the banks trust the asset. So for us, the customer is the financial institutions and showing them those returns, predictable returns with low default, low delinquency rates. And then our customers are the contractors to build the technology that allows them to have a simple, educated conversation, right? Before, if you think of a contractor, they're there, it's clunky, they're using carbon paper, hey, pay for this stuff with your credit card. Customer's like, wait a minute, what? This sounds really expensive. You had to find a way for that contractor to be able to have an educated conversation around a monthly payment that was going to be lower than that electric bill, and be able to be very transparent instantaneously within 3 or 4 seconds to show them the magnitude of those savings. Now they're like, oh, wait a minute, maybe this does make sense for me, and that's allowed us to get some traction in the market.
Yeah. So leading with sort of the financial performance of these strategies is always an easier path of getting people on board and convincing them, and then supplementing that with the impact that it creates.
Yeah, the preferential option. I think everybody likes, hey, I like to drive an electric car. It's kind of, I like how fast it goes, but there has to be an economic option. And we're at this great stage now where, humanity, people throughout the country are saying, look, I'm interested in being sustainable, but it also has to make economic viable sense for me. And we've shown them that it does.
Right. And often overlooked, which I'm so glad you pointed to that, is the role of financing and that infrastructure around it, right? And not just in energy. So I just came back from a couple of weeks trip in EU doing a lot of work around circular economy, and that's where they're at that nascent stage of figuring that out. There's a huge economic and environmental potential there. But what they're starting to figure out is how do we get that financing piece in place to fund these kinds of sustainability strategies. And I'm sure there is a similar problem to be solved in other areas of sustainability to make that economic case, to make that financial return case, and then supplement and build that ecosystem that you need around financing to make that happen. I guess the next thing I'll ask you is, what are some of the challenges that you see or you encounter businesses coming across when they're trying to do this, right? And how did GoodLeap? I'm sure
Where do
you
I
had
start?
some. Exactly. So what were some of the ones that you faced and faced often, I'm sure?
Oh, man.
And how did you overcome them?
Well, they change every day. You know, it's like whack-a-mole. There's always a new change, and there's always a new challenge. You know, if you just race to current today, you know, obviously inflation is really challenging on one side, and the consumer says, my utility bill went up on average around 16% throughout the United States. In certain jurisdictions in Florida, it's as high as 40%. Right. And so they're like, well, what happened? Why are my utility costs going up so much? And they are thinking about, you know, how to fix those costs in some way. You know, the consumer is becoming more aware. Like these are really interesting stats. If they you know, drive an electric car, we all see the EV adoption rates. They're about 40% more likely to put residential solar and a battery on their home too. They'll think about that roughly at the same time. And then another 10% of those people will do it within the next year. And so there's a flywheel interesting effect there. But the problem is just pure awareness and education. People think, oh, this is too expensive, I can't afford this. You know, the utilities are not really happy with us, as you would imagine, and they put a lot of things out there, a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt for consumers, because obviously, you know, if you do some of these things, your utility bill goes down, they lose those revenues, and so there's always an interesting dance there. I'm constantly trying to figure out how to partner more with the utilities, how to maybe sell the loans and assets to those utilities so they can have that 25-year relationship with the customer. So I'm trying to meet with a lot of utility CEOs right now to say, look, you can still own the customer, you know, but it's going to be a different relationship you have with that customer than what you've had in the past, because these customers want more energy independence. So some of the challenges are, you know, interconnection, you know, and permitting, and working capital for some of the partners that are growing and scaling these businesses. Demand is there, and demand is growing just based on education and people becoming more knowledgeable about what they can do. No one wants the sad water heating solution or you know, fuel-based heating solution in their home. They're kind of go, well, wait a minute, I do 600 gallons of fuel oil a year to power my home, and there's like 9 million of these homes that still have this crazy stuff inside of it. They're saying, I know I need to do something different, but what can I do? And they're looking at electrified solutions. And so, you know, the more we can, as an education institution, unite together to let people know there are options and solutions for them, the better off we are.
Yeah, and that's exactly to that point. So I do a lot of work in renewable energy and technology, especially with my colleague, Vishal Agrawal. And one of the interesting things about our work in that area is exactly that, figuring out how those incentives or connections between consumers, companies, utilities, and it is such an interesting and rich context. And what you just said sort of pointed out to the levels of innovation needed. Yes, there's technology and product innovation, but then you had to innovate the business model for your company to thrive and operate and create impact on scale, but then also help others innovate their business models, like the utility companies, right? So that must be an interesting challenge to come up against and influence other folks to think differently and innovate.
Yeah, people, it turns out they don't like change, right? And they, you know, I always say if you don't like change, well, you'll like irrelevance a lot less. And so, but a lot of these people that, you know, work in big companies are like, well, I don't want to get fired over this big idea. And there's this massive energy transition happening at the same time. And so, you know, Sanjan, who's going to come up next, the CEO of Conservation International, his first question to me in the green room was, well, do people really know about the IRA? Do they really understand the Inflationary Reduction Act and the incentives that they have? And I'm like, well, you know, believe it or not, the utilities are not out advertising, right? And so, you know, but if you get really granular, just to give you an example, let's just use a fuel-based, you know, water heating solution, okay? This fuel-based water heater that you have a lot in this area, by the way, probably 3 million. Okay, you have one of these in your homes. Okay, so you're one of the smartest guys. You're in sustainability. You have one. All right, so I'll give you some stats. Here we go. We're going to make fun of Vishal for a minute. So that consumes roughly 250 to 300 gallons of fuel oil every single year. So just like imagine gallons of fuel oil in the room, and you're like, oh my gosh, for my water, I've got 250 gallons of fuel oil that that's what you're doing. Okay, let's not go into the carbon, right?
Yes.
And then you go, well, Hazel, I don't know, like, can I get an electric one? Yep, there's amazing electric ones in the marketplace that smart guys like Bill Gates and Breakthrough Ventures and all these people that have invested in, they're like, buy this electric fuel-based water heating solution. There's a number of options that are out there. And then you go, yeah, but it's really expensive. It's like $15,000 for me to put one of these things in my home. It's like, no, but your monthly payment is like $30 a month. You're going to save about $2,500 a year. That's the number if you switch this thing out. And so you're like, well, wait a minute. So wait, but what's the ROI? No, stop. You save money month one. You put it in your house. You save around, $2,500 a year with one of these by replacing it. But you're hanging on to that thing that's clunking in your basement and eating up fuel oil. And so here you are, renowned professor, hyper-educated, way smarter than me, okay? But you still got this thing in your basement.
Yes, exactly.
And so we had a problem, okay?
I was going to say, it's also not that cheaper, right? So, so here's the issue. I live in a condo building where I have to convince the entire building to do it. So that's what I'm working on.
Exactly,
right? So those are the kind of things that you don't think about. So for the longest time, we didn't have solar panels on our roof. So we convinced the condo board to do that. But that's some of the challenge. But it's no more cheap. Like, it's like $10,000 to get one of these things,
exactly, because you just go to the guy that owns the building, show him a simple piece of paper and say, do you want to save $2,500 a year and get a pretty nice, beautiful thing? And so, like, the thing that's hard, hear me on this. We're in Washington, D.C. People have made this so political.
Right.
And it's really sad that it's become this political, like solar's like a bad word on one side and it's a good word on the other. And so we have to look at this as just better technology. Horse and buggies to electric vehicles was not political. Landlines to cell phones was not political. Analog, to digital was not political. And there's just simply better technologies that we can utilize in our homes, in our businesses, in our cars to live more sustainably. But there are these monopolies that have kind of, put us in this place of fear and uncertainty where we're wondering if this is smart and if we should be adopting these new technologies. And I kind of remember it as a kid. I remember the big landline cell phone thing. You remember there was a huge clash over that. And because, let's face it, the landline guys had everything on lock. And then all of a sudden the cell phone came out and they're like, uh-oh, we're in trouble. And so it's kind of the same way with energy. People have realized they can take control of the power of their lives. And our kids, my kids are going to become more educated at looking at their iPhone, looking at their smart thermostat, saying, hey, I'm going to adjust this. Like, I'm going to store energy in my battery at my home during peak hours, and I'm going to deploy it, in the evenings when my utility is trying to charge me 3 times as much through time of use rates. And so they'll get really thoughtful and smart about when to store energy, when to deploy energy, when to put it in their car, when to not put it in their car. And this, if we just educate, we don't need to sell anything. We just need to teach people what's available.
And I'll connect to that. One conversation that I've been having over the last couple of weeks, you mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act, right? So I encountered 2. So it's, again, very polarized, even in the sense of information. So I sort of encountered 2 different groups. One, who's heard all about it, and their questions to me are like, how do we get on this? What do we do with this? And then the other half who has no clue what it is, right? And so that sort of also trickles through the information sphere and affects what gets done. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about, what we've been talking about is sort of this businesses playing a role in sustainability. One of the intriguing things you did was to found your nonprofit, GivePower, which is now in its 10th year, celebrating its 10th anniversary. Later in the day, we'll hear a lot more about GivePower, which does lots of interesting and important things. What led you to start that nonprofit? And how has that changed how you think about its mission over the years?
Well, here's the way I think about things. I think there's like accountants at some point that said, hey, are you an S Corp? Are you an LLC? Are you a for-profit? Or are you a nonprofit NGO? And I always say structure follows strategy, okay? And so you have to be really careful. A lot of people race to structure, but they're not thinking about the strategy. My strategy was, hey, how do I, in the United States and elsewhere, deploy sustainable solutions at scale. Like, what's the real way to get scale where you can deploy these assets and make a difference? And then on the other side, through my nonprofit efforts, I was like, well, I don't want to leave behind the developing world. Right. I mean, the stats are really scary in the developing world when you look at water scarcity and you know, still 3 billion people that don't have electricity, and the folks that are dying from water scarcity. It's like really scary. And so I've had the luxury of going to these places and seeing these things. So just track with me here, and hopefully I inspire another entrepreneur with this idea, because this one came to me a few years ago, and I was like, you know what? I'm not that smart, but this one's pretty good. So, here's where I went. Think about the capital loop so you're like, okay, what strategy do we want to solve? I want to provide sustainable solutions in the developing world, where I want to provide water for these individuals. Now, I made a mistake in my nonprofit early on. I put solar on about 2,750 schools in 20 countries because I wanted to educate women and extend the hours in a classroom so that women could get educated too. Because when I'd been in these villages, it really made me sad. They basically fetch water and are filling up their bucket with water all day versus their brain with knowledge. And I was like infuriated by this. And I said, I'm gonna extend these hours so women can go to school. One of the worst ideas I've ever had in my life. You go and you come back 5 years later, and there's like a bunch of men on cell phones and laptops because I got Intel to donate laptops and all these things. And I'm like, well, this really didn't work. What do I need to do? Well, we had to create a solar water farm that produces off-grid like 75,000 liters of water every single day, using reverse osmosis and using desalinization. And imagine a magic water box, and it really works, and it provides sustainable, healthy water. So now you realize there, strategy-wise, if you can address water for where it comes to the home, and these women don't have to go fetch water all day because they spend like 90% of their life doing that, which is ridiculous. Now you can start having conversations around women's rights. Now you can start having conversations around health or migration. People are like, oh, let's address migration. They don't have water. I'm gonna leave if I don't have water in my village, okay? I'm walking to some other place that has water. And so you realize water really is the first problem. Then you earn the right to talk about education. Then you earn the right to start talking about women's rights issues and migration issues and healthcare issues and all these other things. So that's kind of there, and I won't get into that nonprofit. So now you've got this other company, GoodLeap, that you saw the video on, that I started 20 years ago, and you got the nonprofit that I started 10 years ago. So here's the capital loop, and I call this the continuum of impact. And I guarantee you someone in here can take this exact model and apply it to their business in a way that can drive this level of impact. So the capital loop for GoodLeap is very simple. We go out, we identify technology and solutions that lower carbon. We then convince banks and financial institutions to finance these assets at scale. We then give them to contractors so that contractors can easily install them. Jobs here in the United States where they're out there building their businesses, enabling entrepreneurs with these technologies. And ultimately, all that happens is homeowner saves money, lowers their carbon footprint, and gets all this brand new, bright and shiny electrified stuff inside of their home. Okay, capital loop, we're profitable, we scale. And I thought, okay, well, really, investors just want to invest their money into a company, get a good, solid return, and drive that level of impact. That works. Well, the idea that I had was, wait, stop. Could we expand that into our efforts with our nonprofit and what we're doing in the developing world? And here's the idea. We have about 3,000 companies on the platform today that use this marketplace and use these technologies. That grows by about 250 companies a month. So 250 companies a month say, you know what, I want to get into this business. I know that the battery business is going to be a big business, or smart thermostats, or EV charging infrastructure, or synthetic grass turf. I want to join that platform. And I thought, wow, I'm meeting with all these CEOs. They're all trying to create mission-based businesses. And it's really empowering to see, you know, the guy that took over his dad's HVAC company, he's electrifying it, saying, hey, I want to get into this sustainable game too. I want to participate in this. Now I went to those CEOs and I said, look, what if you just gave me $20 for every transaction on the platform? And I'll actually give you a price break. And they said, okay, well, why? What's the $20 going to go to? Well, because I have this magic water machine that for every $20 you give me, I can provide 20 years of water for someone in the developing world. And they said, now come on, how does it work? I showed them the technology, and they were like, whoa, this is amazing. And I said, so just give me $20 for every transaction, and literally we're gonna save a life. We're gonna provide water for someone in the developing world for 20 years. And I said, I'm not gonna stop there. What if instead of sending your employees to Las Vegas or to the Ritz-Carlton in Laguna Niguel for an incentive trip, you sent them to Kenya, or you sent them to Colombia, or Nepal in the Himalayas, or Haiti, and they actually went and installed one of these systems, and they saw the technology. Now imagine, these people are deploying these sustainable solutions here in the United States. Now all of a sudden, they go over to Nepal in the Himalayas and they install one of these pieces of technologies, and it transformed their lives. I'm really happy to say today there are about 200 different companies that donate that $20 or something a month, and we've sent about 900 of those people on treks around the world to install those systems. What happens is it creates a continuum where you have this capital loop here where people can come in and invest into the company and get the returns that they want, but it doesn't stop. We now connect this ecosystem of all these amazing companies that are also amplifying that message, that are going on those treks, and now, the good news is that raises millions of dollars a year for our nonprofit, GivePower, to go out and do that work. And so GoodLeap covers 100% of the cost for the overhead of the foundation, all the employees, all the infrastructure, and then every donation that anybody would give goes directly to a project throughout the world. And it's allowed us to reach an extraordinary scale in a very short period of time. And so from a strategy perspective, that's kind of the structure that I'm really inspired by right now and thinking through on how you kind of can connect these things together.
Right. Very interesting and very unique, sort of the way both of them feed each other in terms of their successes. That example also exemplifies two things that we really focus on, is like taking that global perspective on sustainability, but also how environment and social are so intertwined. And there's a lot of potential at creating impact, like GivePower is doing that, by exploring that intersection and looking at solutions that hit on both of those dimensions in a synergistic way. Before I turn it over to Q&A for our audience, I'll ask one last question. We have a lot of different attendees in the audience today, some current students in a variety of our programs focused on sustainability, some alumni, some young professionals, as well as some with decades of experience in these areas, right? Maybe the last question I'll ask you is a couple of pieces of advice for them.
Well, look, I'm honored to be here, and I have some friends that attended this university that have made such an incredible positive impact in my life, and they've built some amazing businesses. And so I had an opportunity to come here and meet with you and Paul and a number of people, this year, and I said, look, I want to do more with Georgetown, and the main reason is I think this is one of those key universities throughout the United States that gets policy, but also really understands business and can come out and create the next generation of these businesses. Like, in all candor, I'm here to try to inspire the next generation and show them what's possible. When I came out of college, it was like, hey, if you want to create a lot of wealth, you got to go be an investment banker, or if you're like a tree hugger, if you go over here in Greenpeace on the other side, and it's not that way anymore. Right. Like there's we've created these businesses like Tesla and others that that have a little bit of market cap and some value, and these businesses are very profitable businesses that are scalable businesses, and the only way we're going to solve the problem is by the private sector stepping up and playing a role. And so if we can't inspire Georgetown, alum and Georgetown graduates to get into this space, we're in trouble, because there's a big problem ahead of us, and I think we will. I think our future is good as long as people in here step up to create some of these companies.
Great.
Yeah.
We'll take a couple of questions. If people, you could line up. There are 2 mics on either of the aisle. If somebody has a question or two for Hayes.
The most brave person in the room.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Here we go.
Mr. Barnard, thank you so much for coming here and being so candid with everything that you've spoken about so far. My question goes into GoodLeap and the start of also GivePower. How did you surround yourself with people with the same vision as you? Because even right now in 2023, I see it is hard, even with a sustainability management degree. A lot of people don't even understand really what's going on with that. So 20 years ago, how did you get people to understand your same vision?
Look, I think a lot of people, you got to think back. Imagine were the most highly shorted stock in the history of mankind. Okay? Just like take a minute. There's a lot of hit pieces, let's put it that way, in articles that thought we were absolutely crazy and it couldn't be done. I was so naive in that I thought I was going to take on the automotive industry and the utilities, like two of the biggest, most powerful, well-positioned entities in the history of the world. And I thought, I'm just going to find a new way to power the planet, and we're all going to drive electric vehicles and those type of things. So the reality it was so hard. It was like crazy difficult. And I ate, a meal. My wife, I've been married 20 years now. I've got 3 kids. I literally came home to a cellophane meal at dinner for 15 years of my life. I just started eating dinner with my family like 5 years ago. That's how hard it was. The headwinds were unmeasurable. I had no idea. But I knew in the end, someday I would sit here at Georgetown, and from a bright guy like you, I did. And I was like, someone will get it someday. And I feel like if you stand up and go, man, I want to do this, and I want to be a part of it, I'm like, I've cracked the door open just a little bit. Not a lot, and I've been pounding on that door for 20 years. And I think it'll be easier for you to inspire other people that you sit alongside. I started this company with my 2 best friends. My best friend from the 4th grade and my best friend from my freshman year of business school at the University of Missouri, okay? And those are the only people I could inspire to get going. And it took a lot. I had my best friend on my couch in San Francisco, and I'm barking at him. I'm like, we need to do this. And he's like, I'm not doing this. You're crazy. This makes no sense at all. And I got the whiteboard in my apartment, and I'm like, no, you don't understand. We're going to change the world. And he's like, you always do this to me? You've done this to me since the 4th grade. I'm like, I'm not doing this with you anymore. I got a pregnant wife. I got a dog. I live in Missouri. I got a good job in the mortgage business, man. The mortgage business is great. There's no way I'm doing this with you. And I'm like, if you don't do this with me, then I'm leaving you behind, man. This is our moment, And so I put the best Tony Robbins pitch I could ever put on him, and it still didn't work for a few days. And then finally he called me. He's like, all right, man, I've known you since the 4th grade. I know you're going to make it happen. Let's go. So it started with my best friends. It started with people early in my life that I seduced to move from Missouri to the Silicon Valley for dreams of grandeur. And as more people realized the magnitude of the problem, more really intelligent people said, uh-oh, this is real. I want to get into this industry and I want to do it. And so I think, look, the more we can highlight the magnitude of real issues like water scarcity, and I encourage you, one of the things I want to do with Paul is I want you to go. I want you to go over to Kenya and see it. Lay in the dirt and bring a couple friends and do it on me and go see the pain of what's actually happening. I guarantee you'll get the same visceral feeling that I felt. Sometimes you have to have the lens. And Sanjan's had the lens. He's traveled the world. He's seen the pain. He's seen the suffering. And if you see that, you're like, oh, you know what? This is a real problem. Who am I to sit here in my gorgeous apartment and my amazing life and, eat caviar and sushi every day? I need to do something about this. And so that's how I did it. I literally drugged people with me. In '08, financial crisis hits. Boom, my soul is crushed. I'm like, oh my gosh, man, are we going to make it? I could have done 2 things. I could have quit, or I could have been determined and taken 12 people over to Mali, Africa, and laid in the dirt for 10 days and brought my executive team back. And that reignited my executive team to say, let's go.
Amazing.
I'm biased, but I know all our students in sustainability programs, you have hundreds such friends who are already here and know how important business is to play a role in sustainability.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to what all of you do. Harsh.
Thank you for coming and speaking to us. A question about just reaching out to more home developers potentially. How is that interaction with rather than going to consumer, going to just to developers, make it so they don't have a choice per se?
Well, that's the key. You nailed it. I thought, okay, I can go one by one and try to market to homeowners. The reason you've never heard of GoodLeap, I've never spent $1 in marketing, okay? I used to do these really cheesy radio commercials in another life, and I didn't know what to do. This is what you do when you grow up poor in a 1-bedroom apartment in Missouri with your mom. You're just trying to figure out your life. And so I realized that I had about $100 million a year budget when I was the chief revenue officer of Solar City. So I was playing with real ammunition, and I was trying to educate people on these technologies, and it didn't work, candidly. And so then I realized, okay, The only way to do this right is to focus on the contractor, educate them, and build technology for the contractors. If you can build technology for the contractors, similar to what Oracle did or Salesforce did for enterprise organizations, and really honor them and think through what do they need from a technology stack in an effort to help them evolve, help them streamline the deployment of these assets, now you're gonna win. And that's where I went, and that turned out to be a pretty darn good idea.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tim.
Mr. Barnard, I appreciate you. I think we all appreciate you for coming and there it goes. I think we all appreciate you for coming and speak with us today. My name is Langston Swafford. I'm one of Professor Agrawal's students. You kind of touched on it a little bit just with, talking about being from Missouri, going to San Francisco kind of on a whim and everything, and now you're one of 28, according to Forbes, like one of self-made billionaires. Kind of bringing all of that together, from humble beginnings, living in a single-parent home in Missouri, going to University of Missouri, to being where you are today, talking with our professor. What was the catalyst for all of this, and how did you create it in a field, in an industry where I would assume at the time, like you said, people would assume that you're just a tree hugger and ask you why you're not just going into investment banking or something like that? How did you go from there to here?
Oh, man. I feel connected to you. I'll tell you right now. All right. What's the honest answer on this one? Man, I was the underdog. I want to fight for the underdog. Like, that was really it. I was terrified when I moved. I had never been to California. I'd never been to the Silicon Valley. I left my mom and I said, look, I got this. And then luckily a few years later, I moved her out there too. But I was like, the first thing was bills. I was like, we never owned a home. We always rented a home. So one thing leads to another. You don't have to have it all figured out right out of the blocks. But after I made a little money and I sold software to Oracle for almost a decade, I said, I want to help people get into a home and own a home versus rent their whole life like my mother and I did. And then that quickly led to, wait a minute, and so I created like a financial services company that did mortgages. It was like a bad version of virtual mortgages of like Quicken Loans, to be honest with you. And then I did an insurance company where I saved them money in their homeowners and auto insurance. And then when 08 hit, I got the download, man. And I was like, it's not that, it's the electric bill. And it's clean energy and my ability to convert these homes into sustainable homes. That's where the problem is. Boom, it just hit me. And that's when I kind of went back to my roots and I said, okay, this checks all the boxes. One, protecting homeowners, letting them keep these homes, fixing their bills inside of these homes, and educating them on how to live a more sustainable life. And so I don't even think I'm at the final stage of the journey, to be honest with you, on what the next step is going to be. As Vishal shared, I own an asset management company that's buying a lot of these assets now, and I'm trying to unlock new technologies where I'm financing these things so I can get the banks comfortable with it. I've learned if I can lead for 4 or 5 years, show the returns, then the banks will go that direction. But back to your question on, man, how'd you get the nerve to go do it? If you don't believe in yourself, no one else will. And I knew that I was going to have, what I call an OSM, an oh shit moment, if I packed that car up and I drove to California by myself and slept on a bed on cinder blocks with like 12 other people in this apartment and, worked 7 days a week. And sometimes you got to be willing to push yourself to that maximum fear threshold, to be honest with you. That's where the magic starts to happen. When you're on the edge of kind of your maximum fear threshold and the maximum amount of pain that you can take, that's where you're going to have a breakthrough and be the best that you can be. So I would encourage you, be careful with the comfort crisis. If you've had a lot of success already, be careful. That will crush curiosity. You got to stay hungry, you got to stay humble, and you got to go out there and you got to put your effort into something that you're going to have a crazy amount of passion in, and other people will follow you when you do it. That bravery, that boldness, you'll be surprised how many other people will kind of get connected to that and want to join you on your side.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We have time for one last quick question. Karina.
Okay, I'll be really fast. I really identify with Professor Agrawal's fuel oil quandary. I experienced it myself in my own life. And I think it brings this question of, it's amazing to be electrifying homeowners' houses and that entire single unit supply. I'm curious how you're thinking about multi-unit retrofits and what it means to have the conversations to deploy that electrification at scale.
I always say you can do anything, but you can't do everything, and you got to walk kind of before you run. We will get there for sure. If you look at the total addressable market for just residential homes in the United States to electrify these homes with 5 or 6 crucial items for those homes, it's about a $450 billion marketplace, okay? So that's real, that's pretty meaty. It's enough to kind of get going and focus on in that area, and there's a big part of that problem. But you're so smart and your intuition is spot on. You're like, well, wait a minute, what about when I fly into LA and I see all those warehouses and there's no solar on those warehouses? Like, why wouldn't that be solar there? Why wouldn't there be in multi-unit buildings as well? Because mainly we haven't got the banks comfortable with financing those assets yet. That's really the answer. Now we will. We've got to continue to educate them, show them, like, look, think of a warehouse in LA that's been 99% occupancy for the last 50 years. Why wouldn't they let that building owner put solar on that building and finance that over a 15 or 20 year period of time? I'm working on that. And so when you think about the global TAM that I'm really focused on is, okay, you've got to get that $450 billion market. You have to focus